Hi, I'm Mark Lopez and I'm inviting you to watch Pugad Vloggers, the show that tackles the latest issues in social media on DZRJ 8:10 AM Radyo Bandido TV.
Watch and listen to Pugad Vloggers, Monday to Friday from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. Airing on Sky Cable Channel 224 and on all DTT boxes. Simulcasting online on Facebook and YouTube. Listen and watch on your mobile devices. Just search DZRJ Radio Bandido.
Pugad Vloggers, ako raw titirisin, salot sa bayan wawalisin, walang sasantuhin, ang saya-saya nakakabaliw, kasama natin ang tropa. Pugad Vloggers, Pugad Vloggers.
Yeah, airing on Sky Cable.
Okay, good evening. Ayan. Good evening to everyone. Good evening. Good evening to everyone. So, meron po tayong guest ngayon. Nagkaroon po tayo last time ng magandang discussion, no, tungkol sa constitutional reform, lalo na sa yung pagpapapasok ng mga foreign direct investors. At so yung guest po namin nung time na yon, at siya rin ang guest natin ngayon, ay walang iba kundi si Dr. Emanuel Candido Doy Santos. So Emanuel Santos usually ang pagkaalam ng mga tao sa kanya, pero Doy ang tawag sa kanya, kaya nilagyan ko ng Candido kasi doon ang gagaling ang kanyang pangalan. So ayan, bago tayo magsimula, I wanted to send my deepest condolences and sympathies doon sa pamilya ng ating kaibigang si Bruce Rivera, si Attorney Bruce Rivera. Siya po ay sumakabilang buhay na noong Sunday, nung linggo. So ayun po, marami po sa ating mga kaibigan niya ay nagluluksa. So ayun po mga kababayan, mapag-uusapan sana natin ang ating topic ngayon na tungkol sa constitutional reform. Titingnan ko lang kung ready na ba ang ating kaibigan na si Doy. Ayan, Doy. How are you tonight, Doy? Good to have you.
Good evening, Ryan. Kumusta?
Ox naman. So, ayan po mga kababayan, ang kasama nating si Dr. Doy Santos. Hindi siya medical doctor, ha? Hindi kung may sakit kayo, hindi kayo sa kanya PhD po siya. So, yun po yung kanyang so kaya siya may ganyang titulo. So, Doy, kumusta na ngayon? Meron tayong pinag-uusapan last time, yun yung actually it's something that a lot of people have been talking about, no, kasi for the past more than 10 years actually pinag-uusapan yung need for constitutional reform sa pagbubukas ng constitution, pagtatanggal ng foreign investors, no? Tapos merong laging lumalabas na yung parang kumukontra, no? Sinasabi nila, hindi naman yung constitutional restrictions yung rason eh. Hindi naman yung 60-40 yung rason eh. It's the high price of electricity. That's the reason. Ganun laging nila, parang sasabihin nila yung, parang gagawa sila ng excuse para sabihin, hindi naman yan yung rason eh. So, yun na lang, yung isa na lang na rason ng ayusin natin. Baka mas dumami pa yung investors natin. Pero as it turns out, dun sa ating magandang pinag-uusapan last time, lumalabas na yung palang high cost of energy, high cost of electricity, doon pa rin pala nagsisimula galing sa 60-40 restrictions ng ating constitution.
Kasi noon, utility siya. I mean, utility naman talaga siya ever since. So subject to the 60-40 rule. Ngayon na liniberalize nila yon, gawa ng Public Service Act, dini-classify nila sa utility, hindi na raw siya utility, so ang daming gustong mag-invest ngayon. Pero ang problema yung distribution ay utility pa rin.
Yun.
So, and ang problema doon is yung investment, dahil nasa Paris Accord na tayo, kailangan na nating lumipat mula sa dirty coal or fossil fuel, yung source ng ating enerhiya. Lilipat na tayo sa renewable. Kapag dumami ang renewable sa bansa natin, magiging unstable yung grid. So ang kailangan mo investment sa grid, sa distribution na gawing smart grid kung tawagin, para ma-manage yung variable energy, no? So that mag-equal yung demand and supply ng energy. Kundi puputok yung sistema, magkaka-blackout tayo. And ang goal is umabot tayo ng 50% by 2030. Sa ano na yun sa susunod na presidential term na yun, di ba? Malapit na yun malapit na yun. So kung ngayon 60-40 pa rin yung rule dyan sa energy distribution, kaya mahihirapan tayo doon, and kahit ano pang investment ang gawin mo sa energy generation, kung yung tulay nung kuryente, yung distribution, yung mga poles, di ba? Yung mga electric wires, high tension. Pag yun, hindi mo in-upgrade, gawing smart so that ma-manage mo yung demand and supply, wala ring mangyayari doon. Wala ring, parang magiging source nung bottleneck yon. And yung distributors nga ang pumipigil sa pag-adapt ng renewable dahil ayaw rin nila syempleng mawalan ng negosyo, kasi kapag nag-generate ka ng power, hindi mo na kailangan, hindi ka na kukuha ng energy sa grid. So pinapahirapan nila through the application process. Nagkakaroon ng additional cost yung distribution impact statement kung tawagin. Rini-require nila yon sa mga bahay-bahay na gustong magkabit ng solar panel sa bubong. So nagdadagdag ng 10% yon. So yung restriction na yon ay ang nakikinabang doon syempre yung mga distribution, yung buong Luzon 85% yata hawak lang ng isang kumpanya Babanggitin. Ang Visayas ganun din, parang majority rin, isa lang yung distribution doon. So yun, kaya siguro, and then ayaw nila. So ang sabi nila, hindi, sagot na ng Public Service Act, wala nang problema. Hindi na kailangan ng yung economic chacha, wag muna. Tignan muna natin kung anong mangyayari. Ngayon na nga, it's been, kailan ba pinasa yung PSA? Siguro mga ilang taon na, behind tayo sa FDI natin. Bumagsak nga this year nasa negative territory tayo. Habang yung ibang karatig bansa natin katulad ng Vietnam, yung record nila last year na beat na uli nila this year, pataas yung FDI nila.
Ito yung problema kasi nakikita natin na yung enabling sector itong energy, ang electricity. Siyempre, So kumbaga parang it is itself dependent on the influx of foreign direct investors to come in, and upgrade the infrastructure, particularly in both generation and in distribution.
That's right.
But then, if one of these does not get the right amount of foreign direct investments, so hindi siya na-upgrade. At pag hindi na-upgrade, apektado yung buong economic infrastructure natin. So hindi nahihirapan tayong makapag-invite ng investors dahil sasabihin na nga ng mga tao, masyadong mahal ang electricity nyo. Gaganyan sila, masyadong mahal ang electricity nyo, blah blah blah. Kasi yung
manufacturing lalo.
Oo, lalo na't yung manufacturing nangangailangan niya ng maraming energy Diba? IT, pati mga IT, mga ganun, call centers, actually they need a lot of that as well.
Kaya Kaya nga, yun ang kahinaan natin dito sa Pilipinas. Kung mga islands tayo, di ba? Parang archipelago, mahirap yung power distribution. Kaya kailangan na talaga ng pasukan ng investment.
Kailangan ng upgrade sa systems
Yeah,
na meron.
yun din. Kasi yung mga smart grid, kunwari sumobra na yung kapag kunwari during the daytime, pag hapon na, then yung sumisikat yung araw, sumusobra kunwari yung generation ng solar, commercial solar or rooftop solar, mayroon tinatawag na load shedding isi-switch off mo dapat yon. Yung distribution company ang nag-aano nun. So, ang kailangan mo nun, smart grid. Yun yung tinatawag na load shedding. Kapag bumaba naman sa gabi, kunwari, umina na yung solar and wind mo, kailangan sabihin niyo yung
Generation.
yung mga peaking plants kung tawagin, yung mga either natural gas or coal or hydro or nuclear, kung maka-nuclear tayo, isi-switch on nila yon. So, yun ang magiging problema kasi natin pag hindi tayo nakapag-upgrade ng grid. Ganon.
Nako, yun nga ang problema natin. So, parang ang nakikita kasi natin itong yung mga usapin ng energy,
Yes.
napapasukan ng tawag nito parang political ideology instead of yung practical minded problem solving.
Yes,
no?
yes.
So parang nandiyan lagi yung
Actually, Orion, yung former economic planning secretary ni Marcos senior pa, si Professor Gerardo Sicat ng
yes.
nagsusulat siya parati sa Philippine Star. Binabasa ko
Oo.
So, yung latest nga niya, what is preventing us from growing, yun nga, he always harps on the economic restrictions in our constitution. So, one of his most recent, columns talked about how some people thought nga with yung Public Service Act, na-solve na natin ang problema. Okay? But he is adamant, he's saying that ito October 27, 2023, so it's fairly recent. Kasi he was the planning secretary of Marcos Sr. from the 1970s to 1981. And nag-celebrate ng 50 years ang UP School. Siya yung nag-start ng 5-year plans, yung development planning. Hanggang ngayon, observe pa rin natin yan. Remarkable thing, buhay pa siya. And I saw him during the inauguration ni President Bongbong.
I actually met him back in 2011. 2011 there was a parang roundtable discussion at the UANP. UANP, and then it was all about constitutional reform, structural reforms and all that. So nandun ako, nandun si Tita Chit Pedrosa, the late, she was there. So we were collaborating on this, and then nandun din siya. He was one of the panelists, and that's how I met him. So he was always really talking about opening up to foreign investors.
Yes. So siya yung chief technocrat ng panahon ni Marcos Sr. Ito yung sinabi niya recently. Sabi niya, precious time was lost when the move in Congress last year to amend the restrictive economic provisions directly through constitutional amendment did not move forward. The president did not support the effort by saying that such a move was not in his priority legislation. Yun. Kinalulungkot niya na hindi tinuloy, di ba, yung kay Robin Padilla,
yun.
Niya, pumasa na sa House, di ba? Pero when push came to shove, kasi, hindi sinulong talaga. So nabinbin. So he said, has been my belief that explicitly removing these restrictive provisions from the Constitution would give us the required flexibilities to improve our incentives in attracting FDIs. Such a move would lead to greater attraction of foreign investments than investment promotion efforts that do not correct the frailties of our policies. Yun ang sinabi niya recently as a few weeks ago sa kanyang column sa Philippine Star. And since leaving the government, I mean, he's been writing a lot in economic history ng ating bansa.
Indeed,
from the
indeed.
30s up to now. So yun yung consistent theme na lagi niyang inabanggit all throughout from the 1930s. Nagkaroon na ng restrictions up to the present Constitution. So sabi niya, nag-liberalize na tayo, open up in many parts, pero
may
ito
kulang pa rin.
Handbrake sa ating ekonomiya. Yun.
I remember he wrote a very nice article many years ago where he was trying to explain sa mga ordinaryong Pilipino na meron tayong mga examples ng anong nangyayari sa isang lugar na dating mahirap o dating sleepy town na biglang parang yumaman dahil pumasok ang foreign investor. So ginamit niya yung example ng hometown ng father's family ko. So yung my father's clan,
Okay.
no? Sa Balamban, Cebu, no? So Balamban, Cebu is a very sleepy fishing town basically.
Yeah.
Until I think it was a consortium of businessmen, including the 𝗲�囲𝗱 group, and then there was also, of course, that's the time of the late Governor Lito Osmeña, where they decided to invest there in shipbuilding. So they set up facilities there that were able to attract I think Japanese and Korean shipbuilding companies, and then now, of course, there's so many other shipbuilding companies, including an Australian one, I think Austal.
Yes, Austal.
Austal, no? And so you have all these companies there, and so this sleepy town suddenly became a very active boom town. And now, ang daming mga remittance centers, I mean, yung mga parang tawag dyan, yung mga express padala, yung mga ang tawag dyan, yung mga Cebuana, of course, Liwilye. Ang daming mga nandun na mga taong galing sa iba't ibang parte ng Cebu or iba't ibang parte ng Visayas or pati ng Pilipinas na nandun nagtatrabaho tapos nagpapadala ng pera dun sa kanilang lugar.
Nasa top 10 na yata tayo shipbuilders in the world
Oo.
Nasa top na tayo. And it's funny you should mention na it was the Japanese, the Koreans who brought the know-how with them, the Australians, so that now we have the know-how. Kasi ganyan na ililipat yung That's what we talked about last week, diba? It's more than the money. It's the technical know-how of how to actually do it. And ang Korea nga, how they became a shipbuilding nation. Before it was the Scots that knew how to make ships. The Scots in the Scots in England.
Yeah.
And in the UK. Yeah. So diba si Adam Smith nandun siya yung trade, diba? It was a trading center. So the Scots knew how to make. They were the leading shipbuilders of the world. When the Koreans started their shipbuilding industry, they imported the technological know-how from the Scots, and then they overtook them. Just like with semiconductors, they brought it in, and now they're the leading phone maker, di ba, yung Samsung.
Yes.
So that's how you do it. You bring in the technical know-how first, because in a land nga where there are no watchmakers, how do you become a watchmaker? Where there are no watches, how do you become a watchmaker?
Yeah.
Somebody has to come in who already knows how to make watches so that you can make watches. And then nailipat na ng Korean sa atin yung technology, and And now that we are gonna be upgrading our defense, our ships, because of yung geopolitics in the maritime upgrading, our modernization, we can now benefit from from that industry that was born because people brought in the technical know-how. So it's that yun yung importante. In fact, people often when was the fastest period of growth in our history in the Philippines? A little bit of trivia. When was that?
Modern, or I mean, like when we were already independent, or pre?
Yeah, since our independence, kunwari, or even from the 1930s, the fastest period of growth. Naririnig mo yun sa mga tatay sa mga tatay.
Was it post World War II, and then there was a lot of construction times and all that? Huh?
It was from it was in the 1950s, right?
1950s, yeah.
The Philippines grew at an average rate back then of over 7% back in the 1950s. Now, and even during Marcos' time, President Marcos, hindi rin niya na equal yun eh. Now, some people might say, ano bang nangyayari nung time na yun? Hindi ba sarado tayo sa foreign investment or whatever, di ba?
From what I know, maybe I'll hazard a guess. During that time, we may have been so-called closed, but we were open to the Americans because of the parity agreement, right? The parity rights,
So, sorry, we were growing at a rate of 6.4, but our industry was growing at a rate of 7 point something.
Okay.
So that was the highest, kasi nung time ni Marcos, 60s was 4.93, 70s was 5.87. Syempre, nung 80s, bumagsak. And then we've been trying to recover ever since. If COVID had not happened, the 2010s would have exceeded the 70s, but not the 1950s.
Wow.
So, sabi niya, wasn't that the Filipino first? Yung time nung Filipino first? Ni Garcia? Hindi. Kasi ang panahon ni Garcia was 58 na.
Oo, papagtang 60s na.
61.
Oo.
Sorry, kasi namatay si President Magsaysay.
Magsaysay, oo.
And then so si Garcia nag-assume, I think 57 to Pero yung Philippine First, pumasok yun mga 1958. But all that was kasi nung after the war, open trade tayo with the Americans. That was the Bell Trade Act.
Yeah,
so, ang dami nating in-import kasi walang restriction. Nagkaroon ngayon ng balance of payments crisis. Kasi syempre, we had to reconstruct and all that. Ngayon nagkaroon ng balance of payments crisis. Even though the Americans provided some money to help reconstruct, it's chronicled in Booty Capital how the elites plundered it and used it for their own we had a balance of payments crisis, meaning to say too many dollars were going out buying stuff, importing stuff. So by 1949, the Bell mission, they came and they advised us they had to impose some import control restrictions. Meaning to say, ang makakapasok lang yung mga heavy yung mga equipment, yung mga kailangan for industry.
For industry,
not the final goods. And magkakaroon din ng exchange controls, meaning to say, lahat nung kinita ng mga exporter, they have to surrender it, and then that will be used by the people who are given the import quotas to buy. So nagkaroon ng parang import substitution policy doon time na yon. Now during that time as well, as you mentioned, the Americans after the war, in exchange for the reconstruction money that they gave, they said, give us parity with the Filipinos, meaning we can now invest, no, like the Filipinos, no, you're open to foreign investment. Actually, that was the most open period of
I'd say it
our
was, yeah.
history.
Kasi maybe just to interject, I think what was happening there is every time the Constitution or the law mentioned Filipino citizen, automatically that was reinterpreted to mean Filipino citizens and American citizens.
Yes.
Right? Filipino companies and American companies. So parang that was automatically, there was that way of reinterpreting the text because of that parity.
Well, had it not
amendment.
been for that provision in our 35 Constitution, the Commonwealth, which got carried over when we became independent, otherwise it would have just been subject to interpretation of the law.
Yeah.
So the Americans asked our Congress in 46 to amend our Constitution to grant parity rights to the Americans. Part of that was that we could not adjust our exchange rate without the US President's approval. Now that was a big stain. When you see the textbooks, it's a big stain on our sovereignty because we didn't have monetary independence, no. But magsaysay through the Laurel-Langley Act convinced the Americans to renegotiate that part, the exchange control, because it was a 2-to-1 at the time, and so. But the Americans stood firm on the investment part. Parang they were still given parity. Tayo naman, we had preferential trade with the Americans, meaning we could export
Sugar, yeah.
our subject to a quantitative quota. The Americans naman could have access to our market. But then because of and that's what kind of led to the balance of payments crisis kasi pasok lang ng pasok. So nung inimpose na yung import restrictions, and there were tax incentives as well to invest in industry, that's the only time that nag-take off na tayo. And this was mainly during the time of magsaysay, and this is why they talk about the 50s as almost like that golden era. Kasi along with that was the surrender of the Hook Rebellion, ganyan. So, and then magsaysay privatized a lot of the state-owned companies. So it was our parang golden era nung time na yon, no? Then when we were starting to get rich. In fact, si Hutchcroft, he says that our industry went from 10% of the economy to 17% during that time. So ngayon, nung pumasok na si Filipino First, si Garcia, ang ginawa lang nila, pinaburan yung Filipino entrepreneur to get the import quota. Okay. So ang pwede lang, so ang Filipino First lang ang pwedeng magpasok. So they now during that time bumagal yung growth rate. Bumagal naman yung growth rate. So I think yeah, so, kasi madalas sabihin nung time ng Filipino First nung 1950s napakalakas na natin, Pero actually, bumaba. Yeah, and then nagka-corruption. Kaya kinurap kasi yung sistema na yun eh. So ang nangyari talaga hindi when from 58 to it decelerated. Pa rin, it was still expanding but the growth had settled down. Double digit, So ganun ang nangyari, and then and after that came the period under Macapagal when they adjusted and when they allowed it to they liberalized
again, yeah.
The import. They allowed the exporters. They adjusted the exchange rate, and that gave a huge windfall to our agricultural exporters. Kasi I think from 2:1, naging 4:1 yata. So for every dollar, they were now earning 4 pesos. So yumaman sila. they earn the windfall. But syempre for the industrialists, mas nahirapan silang mag-import ng mga goods.
It became more expensive for them.
Yes. So
Yeah.
so that's why our growth decelerated in the 60s. Marcos tried to reverse that trend, but his was through debt-driven,
Yes.
and then so in the 80s it crashed. So it that was the height of our industry when it reached nearly 40%, and since that time it's just gone back down to the 30%, which is the same as the 1950s. It's gone back down. So yun yung storya natin. But remember, all throughout, so after 74, when the parity
rights expired.
expired, remember, and then we had a new constitution nung time ni Marcos, which had more restrictions. So it was as if we were reclaiming our. Now, I would just like to say, some would say, well, hindi ba dapat we should rely on our domestic Filipino entrepreneur? Shouldn't we have, hindi ba tama yun na dapat Filipino first muna, ganyan. Kasi ang problema nga dun sa ganung klaseng pag-iisip is that walang technical know-how yung Pinoy nung time na yun eh.
Oo.
So it was commented by Hutchcroft na most of the Filipinos were producing under license from US companies. So like yung mga Mongol pencil, yung mga crayon, they were producing this pero under license. So meaning to say the technology is coming from the American company, license lang sa Filipino for a time na gamitin yon, which is a good way really of
it's a form of technology transfer, diba?
It is. Pero syempre and it's chronicled in 𝗕𝗶𝗴𝗆's book, yung The Pretenders. Where he talks about there were this was during the time ng mga nationalist sa Senate. May scene dito in the book. This is fiction, by the way. Pero based on true life, kasi there's this board meeting na nandun this certain Senator Reyes who's a nationalist. Siya yung legal counsel. Then you had a Spanish, an American, and a Chinese. And then kinikwento rito, nang ginagawa pala nila, linuluto pala nila yung import, inflate nila yung price ng makina. And then yung sobra, hindi niya babayaran yung buong price, ini-inflate lang. Ginagawa ng mga smuggler ngayon, binababa yung price. Pero nung time na yun, tinataasan yung price. So yung sobrang, yung patong, they would funnel it to a Swiss bank account. Parang ganun yung... But it was all enabled by this so-called nationalist senator who was actually advising them. And sila naman, the American, si Dang Mouth ba yun? There's a Chinese named John Lee, and there was a American. Anyway, they married. So the American married a lady from Negros, and then the Chinese married his maid from yung mga ganon, and so treated as na sila, parang kumbaga they're behind the wall.
they had access through their Filipino spouse.
Yeah. Well, the American, I guess, through the parity,
Through parity as well, during that time.
But he also married to an influential family now. So this is the story of that time, that they were just bastardizing it. And also because they were just aiming to replace imports. And this is what Sikat says. Unlike Japan and Korea, whose aim was to target
export
the American market.
Yeah.
Ours was mainly agricultural exports to the American market. But the way Hutchcroft explains it is that we didn't have a sufficient length of time to deepen our industry. So kung yun napahaba lang yung process, unlike in Latin America where matagal na, since the 1930s pa sila nagsimula, And they weren't too much impacted by World War II. So, nag-deepen talaga yung industry dun sa kanila. So, nagkaroon talaga sila ng deepening, and pati yung mga yung sector of manufacturing grew. So they had a more substantial vertical linkage. Sa atin was more horizontal daw. Just had a bunch of these. So we didn't have, unlike in Japan, they started way much earlier, diba? The Japanese Miracle chronicles from the 1920s to the 1970s, but even before the 1920s, under the Meiji Restoration, we were talking about that.
Yeah.
Nag-start na siya and kinary over lang dito. So they had a longer period, and plus, you cannot get away from the political economy because land became concentrated unwittingly under the Americans through their land reform, when American companies were restricted from owning more than 1,024 hectares of land. So when the Americans bought the friar lands from the Spanish under the Treaty of Paris, and they distributed it and sold it, ang nakinabang lang were the local
elites,
the principales, who then ran for Congress, who then issued themselves the franchises, which again, the American corporations were restricted from participating in under the Philippine Organic Act of 1902 until the parity arrangements set in after the war. And that's when we saw now during the 30s, before the war, we were benefiting pa rin from that free trade with America. But then after the war, yun nga, things took a turn for, things changed when the keys were handed to us. So but nevertheless, we stumbled upon a formula in the 50s, which was that the Americans, so when the Americans came and brought their American corporations came and brought their technical know-how, that was the fastest period of our growth. And then of course that faded out in 74 with the Constitution. Now, some Filipinos believe that progress is measured by how we need, if that was the stain, if that was kunwari for the nationalists, that was the first sin, that was the original sin, yung granting parity rights to the Americans, regaining it, taking that away and restricting it for Filipinos only in the 87, which followed, is the path to redemption of regaining our sovereignty. But that has not been the case, no? So ever since, we've seen it, di ba? So that's why with these restrictions, ang tao ngayon, iniisip nila, ano bang kailangan natin gawin? Maybe we need to do something radical. So na-attract sila dun sa mga solution from the left and the right tuloy na, we need a strong man para maging tayo,
Oo nga eh.
Pero hindi yun yung problema eh. Yung problema ay yung restrictions talaga dun sa investment sa ating bansa. As we talked about, now the bottleneck is energy and So yun ang problema.
And like what you were saying, no? It's a lot of it has to do with having that know-how. No? I'm going to take a quote from founding Prime Minister of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew.
Yeah.
So this comes from his book, From Third World to First. He said, "We did not have a large group of ready-made entrepreneurs such as Hong Kong gained in the Chinese industrialists and bankers who came fleeing from Shanghai, Guangzhou, and other cities when the communists took over. Had we waited for our local traders to learn to be industrialists, we would have starved. It is absurd for critics to suggest in the 1990s that had we grown our own entrepreneurs, we would have been less at the mercy of the ruthless MNCs. Even with the experienced talent Hong Kong received in Chinese refugees, its manufacturing technology level is not in the same class as that of the MNCs in Singapore.
Yun.
Yun yung sinasabi ni Lee Kuan Yew. No? So it's all about, yung sinasabi nga niya, it's about the kind of know-how. Kasi nga yung mga mayayaman, the rich people of Singapore before were not industrialists, they were traders, buy and sell. No?
Yes.
And then if you want to, mga ganun tindera, mga mall owners, retail, di ba? Ganon.
Yeah. So remember, Shanghai was the before
financial
the
center. Yeah.
civil war in China. That was where all the foreigners were based, di ba?
Yes.
That was the center of Chinese capital and everything, di ba? So sila yung na-displace by conflict, and Singapore took them in. And when they came there, them along with the British capitalists as well, they collaborated, and then they produced this.
What Lee Kuan Yew is saying here is Singapore did not get the same number that Hong Kong did. So so what he's saying is Hong Kong was able to receive a large number of these refugees. Singapore unfortunately did not. That's what he's saying. So we did not have a large group of ready-made entrepreneurs such as Hong Kong gained in the Chinese industrialists and bankers who came fleeing from Shanghai, Guangzhou, and other cities when the communists took over. So he's saying we did not have that same we did not have that same advantage that Hong Kong had, because when all these Chinese businessmen from Shanghai were forced out by the communists, they fled primarily mostly to Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Singapore did not have that kind of influx because it's a little too far. So that the only rich people they had were mostly the traders. So mga buy and sell. So that's why he's basically saying ultimately we had no choice but to really just get MNCs. We had to really we had to bring in multinationals.
So and mostly from Britain, ba?
Yeah, from every American, Japanese, European, British, whatever, all from everywhere.
Okay.
So there's also another quote coming from Mahathir Mohamad. So he says, the increase in this is coming from A Doctor in the House, which is his Mahathir's memoirs, no? A Doctor in the House. It says, the increase in foreign investments helped to create jobs and so lowered the unemployment rate, which was high at the time. Our approach differed from those of Japan and Korea, where the preference was for acquiring foreign technology for investment by the locals. We did not have local entrepreneurs with the money nor the willingness to invest in industries they were not familiar with.
Yeah.
It was only after many years that the Malaysians acquired the knowledge and industrial skills to invest in manufacturing. Thus, it was through FDI that we succeeded in converting our agricultural economy into an industrial economy and eventually solved our unemployment problem. So it's very similar thing that he said, that we did not have local entrepreneurs with the money or the willingness to invest in industries they were not familiar with. Whereas Lee Kuan Yew was saying, had we waited for our traders to learn to become industrialists, we would have starved. So he's basically saying it's all about the lack of know-how among their local entrepreneurs.
Yeah. And it's also about the smaller SMEs supplying to those large MNCs.
Yes.
That's how you start to parang branch out or move, transfer that kind of technical know-how.
Indeed.
Kasi I was watching a show, and the Japanese, there was somebody from Japan, I think from the JETRO, the Economic Trade and organization. I mean, what's your biggest problem now? Sabi niya, we need the suppliers, the supply chain. Yun ang kailangan natin. So yeah, yun ang that's what's preventing us from growing. I suppose is the openness to foreign indirect investment in the key sectors, no?
Key sectors, yeah.
Of our
yeah.
economy.
And no amount of what you call this, yung parang cosmetic or workarounds is going to help, because like what exactly is this PSA?
So, anong
PSA
gagawin mo?
thing?
I-declassify mo yung distribution. So, iwan na lang, water distribution. Paunti ng paunti. And then, ano mo susunod? Yung public utility vehicles din.
Exactly.
So, wala nang maiiwan. We will end up with no utilities. It doesn't make sense eh. I-lift mo na lang yung
just remove the constitutional restriction, diba? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that has actually really hobbled us because of the constitutional restrictions. Like, there's no way around it, and then you create these workarounds, which is an extra layer, but then it's also subject to manipulation sometimes. So, I mean, I recall how we had this company in the Philippines called 𝗥𝗲𝗽𝗆, and 𝗥𝗲𝗃 was started by a Singaporean entrepreneur who's married to a Filipino. So Angeline Tam is her name. She lives in the Philippines. Her husband is Filipino. They started 𝗥𝗲𝗃, and 𝗥𝗲𝗃 is basically ride hailing. It's kind of like Grab, but using motorcycles, right? And suddenly there was this question about them saying that, oh, they're actually unconstitutional. They're not supposed to be operating in the Philippines as a transport operator. Because transport operators are actually public utilities, and public utilities are by right supposed to be under a 60/40 law. Blah 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 blah. And she's a Singaporean, so how is that possible? She's the main owner of the company. And then, in reality, if we are to be very strict about it, 𝗥𝗲𝗃 is not a transport operator, because the people who drive under the 𝗥𝗲𝗃 label, they're not employees of 𝗥𝗲𝗃. They're actually, they are users of the app. They're users of the app, diba? So
even under the public sector app, kasi public utility vehicles are still utilities.
Oo nga eh.
So, pero tinan mo naman, na-transfer din yung technology doon by that foreigner na nagpasok dito.
Kaya nga eh.
Pero nagkagulo lang.
Nagkagulo. Actually, you know what? They had this workaround. First of all, so I was going to say,
married to a Filipina.
If she was not married to a Filipino,
the only way he could have solved that was to divest.
Yeah.
Labas na siya.
To be honest, no.
It sends a bad signal to foreign investors.
To be absolutely honest, 𝗥𝗲𝗃 had nothing wrong with it at all, because they are actually, for all intents and purposes, a tech company. They're an IT company.
An app.
They're an app.
Yeah.
It's an app. But
pero yun nga, dahil macha-challenge pa rin sa court.
Oo, china-challenge sila.
Is so, na it can be,
it's subject to opinions, it's subject to the opinions of people.
It lacks flexibility, as Sikat said, and it creates uncertainty.
Yeah. So this is what happened, right? So 𝗥𝗲𝗃, which is supposed to be a tech company.
Ang nangyayari sa atin, yung mga shady ang pumupunta rito.
Yun nga.
Pogos.
Oh.
Diba? Yun ang nagbo-boom sa atin.
Yun nga.
Kasi wala silang pakialam sa legality or what. Babayaran lang nila yung immigration para magkakuha sila ng Philippine passport. So what's happening in the Philippines is it's what we call in economics adverse selection. The bad ones are the ones being attracted.
Yeah.
The good players who want everything above board and pay their taxes and everything should be good corporate governance, sila yung nata-turn off.
Oh, pupunta na lang sila sa Malaysia, Vietnam, Singapore, ganyan, sa iba.
Where the rules are less restrictive. So that we have it in reverse, in the sense that the good players we turn off. the bad players we attract. And then it comes with all the social ills. Diba? Yung,
Yeah, yeah.
yung gambling, prostitution, trafficking, whatever, drugs. Lahat, dala nila. So this is the perverse outcome that our laws did not intend, of course, but that's what's happening.
I mean, if you think about it, then from the very beginning, the way some people presented the 60-40 was that, well, no, if 60-40, if they really want to come in, then they will, they will pay their way through, or they will use dummies. Parang they were basically saying, encourage na lang natin sila pumasok, nagagamit sila ng dummy, which is in from all intents and purposes, it's illegal. From the point of view of a company in the US, which is subject to Sarbanes-Oxley and all these other ISO and stuff like that, that's going to be considered illegal. Parang, corrupt practices yan.
As long as maganda lang tignan sa yung outwardly we are pro-Filipino, but truthfully what we're telling them is no, don't believe our laws, subvert our laws. But you just pay pay someone local who will pretend to be the 60% owner, but you pay him anyway. You just pay him extra. So do it the sneaky way.
Do it the sneaky way.
Shady way. Kumbaga, that's why we need to remove it na lang para transparente na lang lahat, di ba? Like yung Rappler, like yung media, di ba? Yung ganon na nag-ano pa siya, nakulong tuloy siya. Kasi nga yung ano ba yan, yung derivative para kasi 100% dapat ang media eh. Yung stock. So ang ginawa niya, so kung you're contorting yourself just
convoluted,
to be able to justify. And then sasabihin mo, hindi, freedom of the press, whatever. So let's just take that out so that transparente talaga, makita talaga na ito talaga. And then ito yung owners. So alam natin kung sino talaga ang behind dun sa company na yon. Hindi yung patago pa or may shell company, may layered whatever. We are encouraging the lawyers. We are diba? We are encouraging litigation, lawyers, accountants, whereas we should be encouraging productive activity, making things, producing, industry, value adding. I'm not saying that lawyers, but you know what I mean. It's like things that help generate jobs and lift wages. Ganun dapat.
Yeah. Sayang no? Kasi all because of these restrictions, yung creativity ng mga Pilipino napupunta dun sa paghahanap ng pasikot-sikot, no? Na ituturo sa foreigner na willing pumasok. Sige, pasok kayo, lagyan natin ng pasikot-sikot para ano.
And what are we saying? Let's encourage corruption.
Parang ganun
If the restriction, you can just pay somebody. So what are we saying?
Corruption na lang. Parang ganun. Diba?
Diba?
Imbis na yung doon pinasok yung tawag nito creativity ng Pilipino. Sana nandun napasok sa engineering, sa di ba?
Kaya sino lang ang yumayaman dito sa bansa natin? Di ba?
Kaya nga eh.
Sino lang ba ang nakikinabang? Pag may nakita kang sports car na siguro yan, congressman o kaya taga customs o baka taga BI. Ganun eh. When it seep into the culture na pag meron kang Porsche or whatever, siguro yung tatay mo politiko. Ganun eh. Hindi yung if you go to Singapore or Japan, pag may nakitang Maserating dumadaan, siguro yan, anak ng bilyonaryo, ganyan, anak ng tech entrepreneur. Sa atin, pag makita natin yon, smuggler siguro yan,
It's either someone who is a gatekeeper or a gatecrasher. Smugglers are gatekeepers. Yeah, di ba?
It's adverse selection.
Yeah, adverse selection ang nangyayari. So
yung mga Pilipino na productive or matino, nagigibang bansa na lang. So nagkaka-brain drain tayo.
Ayun na nga.
Yun ang nangyayari. So sad.
Grabe, no? It's really sad talaga.
So sad.
It's a very sad situation.
Dalawa na tayo doon. Orion.
Kaya nga eh. Ayun na nga eh.
Hindi
Yun
na
na nga
natin
eh.
nasikmura or nahirapan tayo.
Oo. So mga kababayan, siguro just as yung background ni Doc. Basically top level civil servant siya dun sa Australia, sa state of South Australia. So kaya yung sinasabi niyang nangingibang bansa, talagang nagre-resonate sa aming dalawa yan, yung issue na yan.
Yes.
So yun. So we're actually on our final last 3 minutes. So Doc Doy, would you have any final words for our audience para naman we leave something with them?
Yeah. Well,
from you.
hopefully sana nasundan ng mga tagapakinig, tagapanood yung kwentuhan natin, ano, ang dami nating tinalakay kasi, and it was more conversational, hindi na. But yung bottom line nga dito, so we've come to sinubukan na natin lahat eh. Infrastructure, anti-corruption, good governance, whatever. What's lacking is the know-how. Yun lang eh. And where does that come from? That comes from the people who have done it before. So the only way we can compete, kasi nasa low value tayo noon, ngayon kinuha na ng ibang bansa yun, is to advance to the next level. And the only way we can do that is bring the technical know-how, open it up, para wala na yung mga uncertainty and yung mga lagay-lagay, di ba? And ma-encourage yung talagang good type of investor, hindi yung mga pogo na yun ang nagbo-boom dito eh, yung mga hindi sumusunod sa batas, yung mga ganon, nagdadala ng mga problema rito sa atin. So, kaya nangingibang bansa na lang yung mga Pilipino na disillusion kasi wala kang mapuntahan. So, yun lang yung punto natin, I guess dito, no, Orion. Far from being not nationalistic, we are actually nationalistic.
Oo. Gusto natin mag-improve ang Pilipinas.
We believe na kaya natin to eh.
Kaya.
If we only open up and be progressive in our thinking, adopting new technology from abroad, and be open to the world.
Exactly. Good. Well, thanks again to our guest, Dr. Emanuel Santos, otherwise known as Dr. Doy Santos, no? Kaya nga Doy kandido, di ba? So yun. So mga kababayan, maraming salamat sa inyong pagtangkilik sa aming programa ngayon. Sana po ay marami kayong natutunan. Pwede niyo magamit ang mga natutunan ninyo pag nagkakaroon kayo ng diskusyon sa iba't ibang mga kaibigan ninyo, mga kamag-anak ninyo tungkol sa bakit kinakailangan maging bukas ang Pilipinas sa pagpasok ng foreign investors, bakit kailangan baguhin ang ating saligang batas. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat. Thank you, everyone.
See you.
Pugad Vlogger.